The Entrepreneur, Building Wealth, Creating Impact, a Strategic Framework. Written by Daniel Eremesele. The Architecture of Dual Value Creation. The modern entrepreneur operates at the intersection of two traditionally separate domains: personal wealth accumulation and societal impact. The strategic challenge lies not in choosing between them, but in architecting systems where each reinforces the other. This requires abandoning the false dichotomy of profit versus purpose and instead designing business models where financial returns and positive externalities are structurally linked. The foundation of this approach rests on three strategic pillars: ownership redistribution, value chain transparency, and community embeddedness. Ownership redistribution. Traditional equity structures concentrate wealth in the hands of founders and early investors. A dual-value entrepreneur designs ownership to dilute over time towards stakeholders who create value daily. This is not charity, it is a mechanism for aligning incentives. When employees hold equity, turnover drops, institutional knowledge accumulates, and operational efficiency improves. The strategic implementation involves establishing clear vesting milestones tied to tenure and contribution, with founder stakes declining proportionally as the organization matures. The result is a business that becomes increasingly resilient precisely because it becomes less dependent on any single individual. Value chain transparency. Most enterprises operate with opacity between profitable activities and mission-driven activities. The strategic entrepreneur makes this relationship visible and intentional. Profitable product lines or service tiers should be explicitly linked to subsidized or at-cost offerings that serve underserved populations. The accounting must be transparent enough that every stakeholder can articulate how the two sides interact. This transparency serves two functions: it builds trust with customers and partners who increasingly demand ethical clarity, and it prevents mission drift by making trade-offs visible rather than hidden. Community embeddedness. A business that extracts value from a community without returning structural benefits is a wealth transfer mechanism, not a wealth creation engine. Strategic embeddedness means locating operations in communities with unutilized capacity, hiring from local labor pools, sourcing from regional suppliers, and designing physical infrastructure that serves broader community needs. The entrepreneur treats the community not as a cost center to be minimized but as a partner whose health directly determines the enterprise's long-term viability. The operational framework. Translating strategic principles into operational reality requires specific mechanisms across 5 domains: capital structure, governance, talent, product architecture, and measurement. Capital structure. The entrepreneur seeking dual value creation must be deliberate about funding sources. Venture capital optimized for exponential returns will create pressure incompatible with community ownership and patient growth. Alternative structures include revenue-based financing, where investors receive fixed percentages of revenue until a capped return is achieved, community investment funds that blend concessionary and market rate capital, and direct public offerings that enable local stakeholders to become shareholders. The strategic choice is to match capital type to growth velocity, using high-return capital only for phases where scale is the priority and transitioning to patient capital as the enterprise matures. Governance. Traditional boards optimize for shareholder returns. A dual-value enterprise requires governance that formally balances financial and mission objectives. This can be achieved through multi-stakeholder boards with weighted representation from employees, community members, and investors, mission-lock provisions that require supermajorities to alter core social commitments, or hybrid structures where a holding company owns operational subsidiaries with embedded mission requirements. The critical element is that governance cannot be advisory. It must have binding authority over strategic decisions. Talent acquisition and development. The entrepreneur must build human capital systems that identify potential in unconventional places. This includes eliminating degree requirements where competencies can be demonstrated through work samples, creating apprenticeship pathways that convert non-traditional candidates into skilled contributors, and designing compensation that combines competitive base pay with meaningful equity participation. The strategic advantage comes from accessing talent pools that competitors ignore, building loyalty that reduces recruitment costs, and developing institutional capabilities that cannot be easily replicated. Product architecture. Products and services should be designed with dual-use functionality when possible, premium offerings that generate surplus, and accessible versions that extend impact. The design discipline is to ensure that the accessible version is not a degraded product but a genuinely useful solution optimized for different constraints. This requires understanding the full spectrum of customer needs and designing modular systems that can be configured across price points without compromising core functionality. Measurement. Financial metrics are necessary but insufficient. The entrepreneur must develop impact metrics that are as rigorous as financial ones, employment quality indices that track wage progression and skill development, community health indicators that monitor local economic multipliers, environmental footprint measurements that are audited independently, and customer outcome data that demonstrates whether the enterprise is actually improving lives. These metrics must be reported with the same frequency and accountability as financial results. Scaling, exiting, and legacy. The ultimate test of a dual-value enterprise is whether it can transcend its founder. This requires strategic planning for three eventualities: growth, leadership transition, and capital events. Scaling strategy. Growth should be pursued selectively. Not every market represents genuine expansion opportunity, some represent dilution of mission. The strategic entrepreneur evaluates growth opportunities against three criteria: whether the new market has unmet needs that the enterprise is uniquely positioned to address, whether the enterprise can maintain its ownership and governance structures at increased scale, and whether the community of operation can absorb and benefit from the enterprise's presence. Franchising, licensing, and federation models may be preferable to direct expansion when local ownership and adaptation are important. Leadership transition. The founder must plan for their own obsolescence. This means developing internal leadership capacity from the earliest stages, creating decision-making systems that function without founder involvement, and establishing succession timelines that are communicated transparently. The goal is an organization where the founder's departure causes minimal disruption because authority and capability have been distributed systematically. Capital events. Eventually, the enterprise may face acquisition offers, public offerings, or other liquidity events. The strategic entrepreneur prepares for these by embedding protective provisions in governing documents, mission preservation requirements, stakeholder approval thresholds, and asset lock mechanisms that prevent mission-compromising transactions. The objective is not to prevent exit but to ensure that any capital event serves the enterprise's dual objectives rather than extracting value at the expense of impact. Legacy architecture. The final strategic consideration is what remains when the entrepreneur steps away. True dual value creation produces institutions that continue generating wealth and impact without ongoing founder involvement. This requires building not just a business but an ecosystem, supplier relationships, community partnerships, industry standards, and knowledge networks that outlast any single enterprise. The entrepreneur's ultimate success is measured by what persists and grows in their absence. The path described here is harder than conventional entrepreneurship. It requires more patience, more complex governance, more constrained capital options, and more difficult trade-offs. But it also produces enterprises that are more resilient, more deeply rooted, and more capable of generating returns that compound across generations rather than concentrating in single moments. The entrepreneur who builds wealth while creating impact does not choose between doing well and doing good. They recognize that in a complex, interconnected economy, doing well over the long term requires doing good structurally. The strategy is not altruism. It is the recognition that sustainable value creation depends on healthy communities, engaged stakeholders, and institutions that distribute benefits broadly enough to maintain the social license to operate. The measure of success is not the exit multiple. It is whether the world is measurably better because the enterprise existed, and whether that improvement continues to accelerate long after the founder has moved on. Thank you for listening, and we appreciate your time with us, and we look forward to seeing you again. Until then, stay blessed and listen to our other materials as well.